For more on this, we're now joined by the South African National Editors Forum Chairperson, Sbu Ngalwa, and he joins us via our video line. Sbu, thank you so much for your time this evening. Of course, starting off here, when it comes to this appeal as SANEF that you put before the Competition Commission, maybe if you can just let us know, what would you say prompted this inquiry?
Look, I think, Mbali, the reality is that the news media has been in trouble for a while. And part of that trouble, in fact, the contributing factor, the largest contributing factor being the digitization or transition to digital. We know that most of the traditional news media has benefited from a business model where advertising was the driving point. But when it comes to the transition to digital, most of that advertising is controlled by these tech platforms, and also it is not as lucrative or sustainable enough to keep a newsroom or a news companies going. So around the world, not just in South Africa, around the world, there have been a number of studies that have been done by news companies to try and determine exactly how they can get their slice of the advertising, because Facebook and Google control as about 80% of that digital advertising, and they only give that pittance to media companies, but also they are not transparent about how they arrive at this value. And news organizations the world over believe that these tech platforms are actually deriving a lot more value and making a lot more money through the advertising they sell from using our content as journalists. And as you know, that we believe also that the content that you have on these platforms also lends credibility to them as platforms, because people go looking for news, and those who consume the news, they are served adverts. So these are some of the things that have given rise to this. I think in this instance, the Competition Commission, as other related or similar organizations in other jurisdictions around the world, are actually looking at whether these behavior by these tech companies that are big monopolies controlling this industry, if they actually infringe on competition laws. As you would know, that the Competition Commission is meant to look at issues like that, issues to do with competition, where companies are acting as monopolies, or where there's collusion, or where competition is not free and fair, basically.
And, you know, looking at the running of a newsroom and how news is actually gathered, you know, one would ask, why is it so important to ensure that the data which lands on social media platforms, that media actually gets compensated for it?
Look, Mbali, the reality is that at a basic level, it's not just about compensation, because the submission actually deals with a number of issues. And the issue that we are foregrounding as an organization, we have 4 organizations that we are presenting today, led by SANEF. It was just SANEF, it was the Press Council of South Africa, it was the Association of Independent Publishers, and also Association of Community Journalists, coming together to say that at face value, let's accept that news is a public good, and that as a public good, there should be free flow of information, and every South African has a right to news. But how tech platforms are behaving is that you find that news content in platforms like Meta is actually deprioritized. You actually, and the algorithms even control what news you see or what content you see. And now, in terms of the Constitution, what the Constitution says about freedom of the press, and also freedom of the press, which also extends to freedom of the media, it talks specifically about the free flow of information as being an imperative and an important point. But if you have tech platforms limiting what people can see, we believe that that has actually implications for South Africans' rights to the free flow of information. So that's one of the issues we are foregrounding, to say that news is a public good that must be considered as a constitutional issue, not just as a matter of commercial competition. And more importantly, Mbali, you've got a majority of South Africans who speak the indigenous languages. isiZulu is actually spoken by probably close to a quarter of the population of this country. But how platforms behave in terms of their algorithms and all other AI tools is that they pretty much mirror the biases of their developers. So in a digital world that is mostly in English, you then have the disadvantage of languages like isiZulu and others. If you search for anything in isiZulu, your likelihood of getting a response is probably close to zero, because they do not have that capacity, or the systems or the algorithms are not taught in a way where they can be able to give you the right answers to your question. And we did attest to this when we searched in Setswana who the mayor of Moses Kotane municipality was, and we got 3 responses just as a demonstration to the commission of how indigenous languages are deprioritized, and they were all wrong. So these are some of the things we're raising as part of this of our submission here, Mbali.
And of course, these hearings will be over a month. What are you hoping to achieve as SANEF?
As SANEF, we're hoping that when these hearings are done, the Competition Commission will make a number of recommendations, but also more importantly, that there will be a research that is conducted in this country around what is considered to be fair value for the news content that these platforms use. In the United States, this study was done, and a similar study was also done in Switzerland, looking at what those various constituencies or jurisdictions regard as fair compensation for news. And we believe that in South Africa, the same should happen, where the tech companies, because they are not transparent, must actually share that information to say how much they derive from news, and they should be able to share that equitably in a way, in a 50-50 format, because we believe that our news lends credibility to that. We think that would be important. The issue of news as a public good is another important issue we're raising, but also the elevation of language, particularly indigenous languages, which the SABC is one of the platforms that actually offer, is important for it to be actually elevated. So is the issue of credible news, which means that all news, or people who subscribe to the Press Council and those who subscribe to the Press Code, their news should be prioritized over all else, or other content rather.
So unfortunately, we have run out of time, and thank you so much for your time this evening. That is Sbu Ngalwa, the chairperson of SANEF, just telling us about those hearings which are taking place for the next month. And of course, this is before the Competition Commission.